Hey everybody, Matt Johnson here, and I am floored. Could the scandal within the LA County Coroner's Office help accused killer David?
Allegations they viewed the medical examiner's files without permission and leaked some of the details about Celeste Rivas Hernandez's case to the media.
Whoever did this will be found out. They're talking about multiple individuals within this office, not only reviewing it, but leaking it.
So does this mean that the trial is in jeopardy, that the death penalty could be dropped?
This can potentially be devastating, I think, to the case.
That's Death Investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, here to help answer your questions about the case. But first, do me a favor, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and hype this episode. Now the case against singer David. Big news in this case, and here to help break it all down, we have Joseph Scott Morgan, distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University in Alabama, death investigator, host of Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. All the details in my show notes. And a friend of the program. Wow, we finally have a trial date, my friend, July 21st. For this case. And I imagine that, you know, the autopsy report, the medical report, that's going to be a big part of the evidence presented.
Yeah, it is. And it's very complicated stuff, Matt. And people will say, well, why is it so complicated? Well, to be very blunt, it's complicated because of the impact of decomposition. This is not like a regular autopsy where we have, and dare I say, the fresh dead, where we can go in and we can actually really truly appreciate current trauma. We can assess it. You can, if there's bruises, you can see, well, you know, this is an older bruise, this is a newer bruise, or any other kind of injury, a broken bone, all those sorts of things. All that stuff's off the table when you're talking about a body that is in such an advanced state of decay. And I'll use a term that they've used publicly, and they're talking about the body was partially liquefied. And so if you just wrap your brain around that, you understand what an uphill battle this is technically, just kind of make your way through this report and try to understand it and how it's going to be presented to the jury.
Yeah. And, you know, before we dive into some of the details and the manner of death and the cause of death, you know, I'm also going to get your reaction as to what's in the news within the past couple days. And that is more than a dozen employees at the LA County ME's office under investigation. I'm going to play a little bit of report from KTLA 5 and get your reaction.
Now, today's hearing comes at a time when more than a dozen employees at the LA County Medical Examiner's Department are being interviewed over allegations they viewed the medical examiner's files without permission and leaked some of the details about Celeste Rivas Hernandez's case to the media. This, according to NBC News investigations. The medical examiner's department is not commenting on this, but the union representing those employees, well, they tell us they remain firmly committed to the privacy of the victims.
So again, that was KTLA 5 reporting. I mean, just your reaction to the headline itself, I found that very shocking.
Yeah, it is. I come from this background. This is my bailiwick. I worked for the coroner in New Orleans and the ME in Atlanta. We're a very small community, Matt. Whoever did this will be found out. This is not a massive organization like when you think about LAPD, where you've got thousands of employees. They don't work like that. And there are very few people that have access to this kind of data. I cannot tell you the repercussions of this. We're going to have to wait and see. I have no idea what the defense can do with this, but let me put it to you this way. There is a real bond of trust that exists between the medical legal community and law enforcement and the DA. Okay, just so we understand that. This action on the part of these individuals within the ME/coroner's office there, if this turns out to be true, there is going to be such an erosion of trust moving forward. There's like an investigative bubble that you work in, and you're trusted as like an ME investigator. You're trusted with keeping your mouth shut relative to cases, unless, and particularly those cases that you have no knowledge or direct involvement in. You're not part of that team. That's an independent group of people within the ME's office. They're talking about multiple individuals within this office, not only reviewing it, but leaking it. And, I don't know who they leaked it to. I think that there's probably a list of suspects that they have. But right now, I think this is an HR investigation within LA County. As this begins to develop, I would not be surprised to see if the DA takes direct interest in this investigation as well.
Yeah, there could be charges for some people that, are supposed to uphold the highest standard. But, just your guess, obviously, you're not working in that office, but in general, could something like this impact a case? Could it jeopardize the case for prosecutors?
Possibly. Because it goes to the erosion of trust. All a defense attorney has to do is say they could not be trusted with the most sacred bit of evidence that exists in this case, and that is this young girl's body. Just let that sink in. How is that going to sound in a court when you're talking to a jury? This can potentially be devastating, I think, to the case. And for all of the police officers that worked on this case, running down leads, and Matt, as well as anybody, you've been following this case forever, they had to track people down. I mean, they went far afield to try to find the information, and all of that stuff could be in ruins at this point in time because of something that was very selfishly done. And one more little bit to this, if there was any exchange of money for this data at all, I think that that's going to be an underpinning for possible criminal action against whoever involved themselves in this.
It's absolutely a travesty to what justice looks like for that little girl that suffered a brutal death.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a pre-trial date now. Some of the case evidence is going to be discussed from this report. And I know that you've had a chance to look over the report. It's several pages long. And then there were other court documents that included things like after placing her body into a blue inflatable pool to prevent her blood from spilling onto the garage floor, defendant used a chainsaw and perhaps other tools to cut off her limbs. Small blue pieces, possibly from the pool, were embedded. It's just really horrific.
Yeah, it is. And it shows a total disregard for her remains. Let's think about this just for a second for Celeste. Okay. She's a child. All right. And she's been being abused in life. Now, to kick it up another level, if that's even possible, now this has been done to her mortal remains. And then after these actions have taken place that were enumerated, just as you had just mentioned just a second ago, now she is taken, and let's face it, discarded into the trunk of a motor vehicle where she is allowed to decompose even further than may have been going on prior to that. We still don't have a tight date as to when she actually died and how long it was before she went into the Tesla. I've been of the mind that there was thought going into this. And when I say thought, I'm not talking about some master plan. I'm talking about somebody that is panicked, trying to decide what they're going to do with human remains once they have them. And that's the other piece to this. So the further you go down, my old saying is there is no basement in the house of depravity. And because it just seems like it never ends with this case. You look at this, you look what was perpetrated in life and then in death against her. And yeah, we do have shocking details. We're talking about mutilation of a corpse. There was one poignant thing that I made note of, talking about dismemberment. She's missing the left ring finger. There's been some, back and forth over the idea that she may have had a tattoo that was similar to the accused on that finger. This was an attempt to, throw people off relative to an ID. And then when you look at the causal factors arising from the injury she sustained in life, Matt, I'll go on record as saying this was not a quick death. She's got one fatal injury that they make note of. She has a sharp force injury on her left aspect that doesn't touch a lung. It does go through the rib, but the really tragic, injury, insult that she has sustained is going to be in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen beneath the rib cage that passes into the liver. I've worked a lot of cases over the years involving trauma to the liver. This is never a quick death. This is a slow bleed out. She would have had an awareness probably, unless she was knocked unconscious or something like that prior to. She would have bled out. And there's even some verbiage in some of these reports talking about how she was allowed to bleed out. I don't know what the source of that is, but we've heard that mentioned a couple of times. I'm going to be very interested to see the source of that. I'm particularly interested in who leaked the information from the ME's office, what the source of that was, and then, moving forward, how this is going to, impact the way the prosecution, is going to move forward with the case, and how the defense is going to use this to their advantage. Guarantee you that they will, though.
Yeah, and especially if there's a conviction, because they're going to say that the jury pool was tainted with information that shouldn't have been released before they were deliberating. But, I was hoping that you weren't going to say that it was a very painful, long, drawn-out death, because, she's a precious little girl that was missing, and she is a little girl. She's a little girl. And I hate it when people refer to her as his girlfriend and all of that. That's a whole nother horrible set of circumstances. But cause of death, multiple penetrating injuries by sharp instruments. Why would they write instruments?
That's an excellent question. There's been some speculation on that. Were there more than one instrument used? I suspect that because of the nature and the level of decomposition here, it's really hard, I think at least, based upon cases that I've worked with similar levels of decomposition, to really pin that down. You can appreciate that there is a sharp force injury, but to say this was created with a smooth edge knife versus a serrated knife, that sort of thing, they may be running into a bit of trouble with that, but they have classified it as sharp force injury, and that they are penetrating injuries. So that means that these are stab wounds as opposed to incised wounds, which means cuts, right? So we're talking about a stab wound or stab wounds. And she's in such an advanced state. I'm wondering if there were any other insults to her body that are now gone. They're to oblivion now. You could not appreciate them, but they did come up with this one injury that was certainly the coup de grace, I think, and it's certainly a lethal injury. It just takes a long time to bleed out from it.
Yeah, and the prosecutors have kind of been suggesting perhaps that maybe that's the reason why they bought the kiddie pool that is part of the evidence during this. It's either that or for the dismemberment. And let's talk about that, because you already talked about the penetrating of the liver and the sharp instruments causing the injuries. But then there's also the dismemberment. The autopsy was limited because of decomposition, which you mentioned.
Right.
The victim's arms and legs were severed, and 2 fingers were also removed. And in glancing at the report, I mean, you've written so many of these, and you read them all the time. But it looks like there were the legs were cut in a couple different areas.
Yeah. For me, anytime you see a dismemberment case like this, first off, it goes to somebody that has no level of skill. Because many times we'll look to people that are in the medical industry, we'll look to butchers, we'll look to hunters, those sorts of things that have a level of skill that understands what it takes to appropriately dissect or dismember a person or maybe an animal they've taken in the wild, right? So, or been involved in butchery or something like this. When you see multiple cuts over multiple planes, that's an indication most of the time the person does not know what they're doing. Many times you'll see these mid-shaft cuts. If everybody will just kind of appreciate where your femur is, the long bone, the longest bone in your body, your thigh bone, essentially. You won't have people that will go, say, for instance, to the knee or to the hip in order to facilitate that. They'll go right mid-shaft with that, and that's one of the most a daunting task that you can do, because you have to go through soft tissue, then you have to get through bone. And most people get into the middle of a dismemberment and they're saying, oh my Lord, what do I do at this point in time? I've created this huge mess. And then, as you can see, and as revealed in the reports, they don't make it to the torso. And generally, that's the biggest uphill battle, where, if you think back, for instance, something that's been in the news lately, you think back to the images people have seen of the Black Dahlia. Well, she is literally bisected. She's cut across the waist very cleanly. That indicates somebody that has a lot of skill relative to that. They would know where to go. They would have time. And you have to have time. You have to have power source, water source. You have to be able to do it in privacy. You don't want people obviously looking over your shoulder while you're doing it. And you step off into this thing, it's like a fly caught in flypaper. You're in the middle of it. You don't know what to do. And I think that's probably what happened.
But why even do that? I mean, It's one thing to kill somebody, and then it's another whole evil demon level to dismember them.
Yeah, it is. And I often think about that. And the cases that I've worked and the cases I've covered generally come down to an individual. I've had serial killings where people have done dismemberment, and there's a whole volume of stuff you could talk about relative to that from a behavioral standpoint, and we're not going to go down that road. But most of the time with dismemberment, it is to so that they can compress the body or package the body to distribute it. There was a young mother, a nurse up in Seattle. I covered this case. I think Ingrid Lynn was her name, where she met somebody on a dating app, and he killed her in her bathtub after a Mariners ball game. And he cut her up into multiple pieces and distributed those pieces around Seattle in waste bins. And that's generally why you do it, to distribute the remains so that you're not going to draw attention. Of course, in that case, the guy opens up his waste bin, there's a foot, sticking up. He didn't do a very good job. And most people don't think these things through. They do it in the heat of the moment. So, for those out there that are thinking there's some kind of dark force out there, where people are really thinking about this and, they're taking all the appropriate, that generally does not happen. That would be an exception as opposed to a norm. Generally, you have it like this. It's frenzied. It's chaotic. It's scattered. And I don't mean like the remains. I mean their behavior is scattered, because they'll start one thing and then be interrupted and then start in another location. They're not very systematic about it.
Yeah, and to your point, that I think that there are examples more than not when we're talking about this subject matter where the remains are scattered, and then sometimes that leads to a no-body murder trial, like we saw in Dedham, Massachusetts, with Brian Walsh, the disappearance of his wife, Anna Walsh.
Good example. Yeah.
But in this particular case, not scattered, and in multiple bags, from what I understand, in the trunk of the Tesla. I mean, I just can't get past, like, why again even do that if all of the body parts are going to be together? And again, it's just
one more thing too, and to kind of put a cap on this. If it couldn't get any nuttier, you're going to retain the remains in a car that you, as an individual, as an accused, have ownership of. Or have control over. You know what I'm saying? Again, it defies logic, when you begin to think about this. Most people would want to put as much distance as they could between themselves and what they have done. This is like somebody that's holding onto it, holding onto the remains so that they can control the remains, right? And they can't quite pull the trigger on deposition of remains. And that's real problematic for somebody in his shoes. I just hope it hasn't been compromised because of this idiocy at the medical examiner's office, if we are to believe what we're hearing right now.
How traumatizing is this going to be for everyone involved, prosecutors, the judge, for the jurors to see this?
Yeah, even by LA standards, Matt, this is something that will live with these investigators for years and years, particularly if there's any more peripheral data that's out there, like images in life, I think, and any other images that might be. I'm not going any further with that. But you can use your imagination relative to that. And then what they see is the end result of literally all that remains, there in that vehicle, all the hard work. And you're sitting there, I think, as a public servant, and you're thinking, why was this not interdicted sooner? What could have been done? And there are no answers to that. You can drive yourself to madness if you focus on that. You can't. You have to focus on the investigation, the science behind it, because there'll be other cases, that will come up. But this will be a benchmark case in all of these people's career. It's something that they will remember forever and ever. And again, I hate to keep coming back to this, but you have to understand, not only have the investigators gone through this and lived this, they've lived it day in and day out. Now they're standing before the possibility that all of their efforts could be ruined by a selfish act on the parts of individuals that may have had contact with sensitive data in this case.
Yeah, and that really jeopardizes justice for all of this. Do you think that could take off the death penalty? Do you think that maybe this doesn't even go to trial because of this leak, and maybe it gets pled out?
Possibly. It all depends on what the appetite of the defense is at this point in time, because I got to tell you, I believe as this grows, and it will, watch, if you don't believe me, as you well know, you watch how this is going to play out in the media. This is going to be a point of leverage for the defense. So, it could be an opportunity for them to approach, because if you're looking to do, in order to prosecute, I'm talking about from an evidentiary standpoint. I'm not a lawyer. So if the death penalty cases I've been involved in, your skirts have to be lily white. All right. I mean, you have to have it has to have such a pure tone to it. There cannot be any blemish on this thing at all. And now here we are. Okay. So your point is well taken in this. If they're looking for the death penalty in this case, this could damn that, I think, very, very quickly.
And here is what the defense has said in the past. The recent proceedings, no cameras, but here's a little bit from the defense.
From the media reports, apparently there have been 4 months of secret grand jury proceedings. We believe that Mr. Burke is entitled at the earliest opportunity to an open preliminary hearing, and the proceedings not be done in secret. So we are asking for a preliminary hearing to be set at the earliest possible date on the 10th date. Your Honor, we believe the actual evidence will show David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, nor was he the cause of her death. And we would like to be able to have the evidence come into the light of day at the earliest opportunity in order to establish that.
Okay, first off, grand jury proceedings are always not done in public. They're always private, right. But she's already teeing it up. And this was an earlier proceeding a couple weeks ago. She wants the cameras there. She wants this in the public, claiming that there's a cover-up already, kind of like beating that drum. So to your point, I don't know where we're heading with this latest information of this investigation into this major department.
Yeah, and I wonder what information she already had. Okay,
maybe
that's just me. I'm jaded, and you're talking about a defense attorney. If you think the prosecution can play it close to the vest, you always see defense attorneys, right, come out onto the steps and they hold press conferences. Whatever they say out there, there's about 90% of stuff that they're withholding that you may never know what they know. And for every person that might want to leak something to the media, who knows? They may have been approached by somebody. I have no idea. I don't really know how to frame this out at this point in time because the news is so fresh relative to it. I really wonder what counsel had knowledge of. Had they caught wind of this in some level? Because I don't think that this is something necessarily new that's kind of popped onto the radar. Because obviously some investigation has been going on. So who else knew about this? Who had been made aware? Was the prosecution compelled by the court to make the defense aware of this? that's going to be interesting to see how that all came to fruition, I think, and just the dynamics of all of this working. This is a horrible enough case in and of itself. I don't know where this is going to land and how detrimental to the case this is going to be. The repercussions of this are going to, kind of extend out like the tone of a bell. We'll find out.
Yeah. And, to your point, to wrap this up, this was the statement by her family saying that they're absolutely devastated by the findings contained in the ME's report. And it goes on from there, gruesome death. And, our thoughts and prayers go out to that family. But any other final thoughts about this report? I know that you've reviewed it. You really know your stuff, obviously. Was she pregnant? Was there any indication of that?
No.
Because prosecutors were alleging that maybe she was going to expose him.
Yeah, possibly. I think that there had been talk about purchasing or acquisition of like morning after pills. However, what the ME could appreciate at the time of autopsy, checked the uterus very well. There was no indication of pregnancy. And I think that she was probably too far gone in order to do hormonal testing, relative to pregnancy. That might be something that will come up relative to any kind of conversations that were had, text messaging, that might enter in. And who knows, maybe she was at one point in time. But as far as the findings of the ME at the time of the autopsy on this body that's in an advanced state of decomposition, no, there's no indication of that. And I think finally, going back to the family, and this is kind of how I would want to round this off, Matt, is that say what you will about the family relative to watching over her and knowing her whereabouts at any point in time. Because of what has happened now, again, going back to what's been released at this point about the ME, family's being traumatized again, because maybe they had a little bit of peace of mind thinking, well, the investigators involved in this case, they have access to the information. You never know what's going on with the inner monologue with the family, what they're hearing, what they're thinking, just kind of comfort themselves. Now, their daughter, who's been subjected to all of this, now she's on display for everybody in that office. People that had nothing to do with the case. All right, just let that sink in just for a second. So she essentially becomes a sideshow at that point in time. And, my podcast, Body Bags, we always try to honor the dead and talk about the dignity of the dead. And this is just the most ultimate slap in the face, I think.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Joseph Scott Morgan, you already mentioned your podcast. I'm going to have it in my show notes. How else can we get a hold of you?
I'm on Instagram, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I'm on X. Don't get on there a lot. Frightens me.
And my wife X right now.
Yeah, and you can find me there. But yeah, I'm around. You'll see me on Nancy Grace and a variety of other programs and platforms. I'm out there.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Anytime, Matt.
David Anthony Burke has pled not guilty to all the charges in connection to the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. If you or anybody you know has any information in the case that could help investigators, please call the LAPD or Crime Stoppers and you can remain anonymous. That's 1-800-222-TIPS. Also, if you would like more information about the case, please head to the video section of this YouTube channel and make sure you hit the like and subscribe, because I'll keep you updated on this case and others. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.